Hello and welcome back to the second day of the Jumpstart Accelerated training for planning and deploying Office 365. This is module 2. It's part 1 of a 2-part module for deploying single sign-on. And this fits into this block of 4 sessions in planning infrastructure, deploying SSO, 2 parts, as well as planning and deploying directory synchronization and ADFS. With that, I want to hand it over to Fulvio to go through the agenda and the content. Please make sure you ask any questions throughout the session, and we might take some of those questions live.
Okay, thank you so much, Stefan. Let's start this new module about single sign-on in Office 365. What we will do now is just understanding identities with Office 365 and a local infrastructure. We will understand how single sign-on will work, and we will also have many demos in this particular module about how to deploy single sign-on inside our organization. And then we will have a short deployment area about deployment considerations. So some suggestion, what you need to check, experience about deployment, and so on. I will try to give you all the information that you will need to be ready to deploy a single sign-on infrastructure in a test environment or in a real environment. This will be a complex module. I will try to keep it as simple as possible to give you all the information that are required to deploy a single sign-on infrastructure.
Yeah, I'll make sure to help you guys get through this. We try to sprinkle in some real-life scenarios to make this more real and less mechanical, but it is intense. Stay with us, very important for the exams.
This will be the first one, let me say, complex scenario. The second one will be tomorrow with Aginkia, and I'm talking about the hybrid coexistence with Exchange. So the most complex scenario that you can have with a local environment and Office 365. So it's something really important, not only for the test, but also for real-life deployment. I just want to come back to the agenda for a second. It's not just a case that we decided to speak about single sign-on before DirSync. If you are planning to deploy inside your organization or inside a customer organization single sign-on, you should start in the right order. So deploy before ADFS and single sign-on, then users using DirSync. So you will need to federate your local infrastructure with Office 365 before, and then import in some way or synchronize your user from the local Active Directory to Office 365 using DirSync. So we will cover all the process in the next, let me say, 3 hours more or less. Okay?
Great.
Let's continue. So, understanding identity. We just spoke about that on the first day about cloud identities and federated identities. We will focus today on federated identities. When we speak about federated identity, we speak about users that are connecting and authenticating to Office 365 with the same credential they are using to access to their corporate Active Directory. So the same username, as we said, and the same password that they are using for their local Active Directory. So to access to Office 365, they will authenticate before on the on-premises Active Directory services. The good thing here is that the password and the password policies that are related to a specific user or a group of users are managed directly on the local on-premise Active Directory. So you can set, for example, your specific password rules, password expiration rule, password length rule, and so on. This is really nice, especially for end users, and also in particular for administrators that can work directly on the local infrastructure and then use the same setting for the Office 365 authentication mechanism. I want to underline again an important requirement, that is directory synchronization. After that, we have built our ADFS infrastructure, so the infrastructure that we will see in few seconds. We will require to create users on the Office 365 environment. This will be done using directory synchronization. We will cover it in the first afternoon with a dedicated module. So federate before and then sync user. Okay, make sense?
Easy enough.
Okay. Again, we will focus today on the third column here. So I want to repeat that once more. Federated identity will provide single sign-on experience to your final user and users, and will also enable your infrastructure to be ready for a hybrid coexistence that we will see tomorrow with Aginkia. So if you are planning to deploy hybrid coexistence between your local Exchange server and Exchange Online, you will require to have ADFS in place and also DirSync in place to have the full environment up and running. This is just one part of the hybrid coexistence environment. What else? We will focus on that in a few minutes. If you are planning to deploy an ADFS infrastructure, please keep in mind that you need to think about a possible high availability scenario, because if your ADFS is not available, your users will not be able to access to Office 365 at all. So no authentication mechanism, no authentication check, no access to Office 365. Okay, so ADFS is a long-term commitment between your local environment and Office 365. Is an important commitment. So when you plan to do that, be ready to do that. Let's continue with our presentation in understanding how single sign-on and ADFS 2.0 works. Before continuing here, I want to underline ADFS 2.0 because on the Windows Server 2008 there is a possible ADFS role. It's not the role that we need to perform and enable ADFS federation with Office 365. We will need to obtain this particular package or module from another source. We will have a look at that in a demo later, but what is important to know is that the ADFS module is not that one that is included with Windows Server, because the one that is included was an old version. Okay? So, what is the main goal of single sign-on? The purpose? As we said, single sign-on enables users to access both the on-premise and cloud organization with a single username and password that you basically create on your local Active Directory. Another good point is that your end user will use the same username, and so the system provides a familiar single sign-on experience. So you don't need to learn an additional username, an additional password, and something similar. And as we said, this enables users to control account policies also for the cloud-based organization. Just for example, we received a question yesterday on the Q&A panel about, for example, password expiration, password length, and so on. If you are using just the cloud identity, you can't have so much control on the password policies, for example, so password length, password expiration, more or less. But if you're using federated identity, you can, because you are leveraging the local AD feature to manage users and password.
Now, and there's a fourth bullet we haven't really mentioned. What's the other purpose or actually benefit of single sign-on? Is reducing the support calls.
Yeah.
Because now that we have only one password to remember,
yep.
less need for resetting the password.
This is really important because, as we said also yesterday, many support requests are related to, oh, I forgot my password, I lost my password is expired, and so on. In this way, users, they need to remember just one password to access to the whole environment.
That's the preemptive bullet 3 right here on the benefits.
Yeah. Also for administrators in general. Okay, let's understand now what are the components that are required to build an ADFS environment inside your organization. When we speak about ADFS in general, we need to consider that there are two main roles for a possible ADFS server. The first one is the ADFS server itself. It's a server component that should be installed on Windows Server 2008 or 2008 R2 and will be placed inside your corporate network. So it's something that need to talk in some way with your local Active Directory, need to access to your Active Directory, need to, let me say, have the list and validate user credential for all your users and enable them to access to Office 365. It is strongly suggested to have at least 2 federation servers inside your corporate network. We just said before that if ADFS is not available, you will not be able to access to Office 365. So once again, have at least 2 ADFS servers inside your organization. This is, let me say, the best recommendation that we can provide. What else? How to provide redundancy for this kind of server. You can enable network load balancing between all the federation servers inside your farm, for example. So you can have Windows network load balancing, is just an example, or you can have also an hardware network load balancer in front of you. So all your users will be able to access to the ADFS farm passing through a network load balancer in general. This should be easy, nothing so complex. Then we have another role for ADFS. It is called ADFS proxy server. This server instead will not be inside your corporate network like the ADFS server, will be outside your corporate network, usually in a demilitarized zone. And this server will not be part of your local Active Directory. This will be in a workgroup, so will not have access at all to your local Active Directory. Between the ADFS proxy server and your ADFS server, there will be one or more firewall, but only one port open here, 443, for communication between the Federation server proxy and the Federation server farm. What else? Let me think about that. Communication, ports, I'm thinking about other possible important information. As we said, Federation server proxy are not placed inside your local Active Directory, nothing more. Also here we can have a network load balancer, so or Windows network load balancing, or also an hardware network load balancer in front of the proxy server farm. Okay, for the moment just understand that there are 2 roles, one inside, one outside your organization. Inside we have the ADFS server, outside we have the ADFS 2.0 proxy server. Make sense? Okay. The main goal of the proxy server is to provide access to external users that will need to authenticate to Office 365, but we don't want for sure to publish directly externally our Active Directory. So we will have to insert something here that we will proxy the access to our Active Directory. We will learn more about that in the next slide. Okay. Let's start talking about ADFS 2.0 deployment option. We can have a single server configuration. This is not suggested, as we said. This is the easiest, the easiest scenario.
That's like the minimum you need.
The minimum.
Right.
You need that. Maybe you can have this infrastructure if you are testing ADFS. It's okay. It's not a problem.
Yep.
But if you are running ADFS in a real-life scenario, this is not suggested at all.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. What we need to do, and this is the easiest scenario. We can also have, and this is really suggested, an additional ADFS 2.0 server in our organization. So at least 2 servers. A maximum of 5 ADFS server is supported at the moment for an ADFS internal server farm inside your corporate network. In front of us, we have a network load balancer. In this case, we are just speaking about a possible hardware network load balancer in front of our ADFS 2.0 farm. It's just an example. You could also replace one of the 2 ADFS 2.0 server using a virtual machine. You can virtualize without any problem the ADFS 2.0 server. It's a good idea. But you need to provide failover and advanced, let me say, redundancy option using virtualization. So Hyper-V, for example, VMware, and so on. You can virtualize the ADFS 2.0 server and provide the high availability of this server using virtualization. So a cluster and so on. It's supported.
So you're basically setting up, and actually you went one step back. You said it's recommended to set up a farm with at least 2 servers.
Yeah, but
that are load balancing, right?
Yeah.
So you're basically not having a redundant infrastructure that will kick in when one of the infrastructure fails, one of the servers fail, but rather using both at the same time. And if one fails, we still have the other one up and running.
Perfect,
right?
perfect.
So
if you
also balances the load at the same time. So
yeah, it depends.
The purpose of high availability as well as load balancing.
Yeah, but the problem is that if you are using, for example, a network load balancer, you can also have, for example, an intelligent network load balancing. So balance the amount of users that are accessing to a specific server. If you are using just the Windows, the network load balancing provided by Windows, it's just something like here and there. It's not so intelligent. For example, yes, you were right. If we provide at least 2 servers inside the ADFS farm, we are okay, because it's not so easy that all the 2 servers are down at the same time. If you are thinking to virtualize in some way in a virtual machine your ADFS infrastructure, please keep in mind to maintain one virtual machine on a server and another virtual machine on the other, if not.
I was about to mention, if you virtualize it, don't put them on the same hardware.
Yes. Also because... Okay, makes sense?
Yep.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Let's continue with the presentation. This will provide access to Office 365 for internal users inside your company to Office 365. So if I'm here in my office, I can access to Office 365 using my corporate credential to access to Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and so on. But if I'm a user that is outside the organization, so I'm working at home, for example, I'm working using an Outlook client, I need to connect with a mobile device and so on. So I'm outside the corporate network. I will need to provide secure access to my internal infrastructure using an ADFS 2.0 server proxy. So an additional infrastructure. Again, here we strongly suggest to deploy at least 2 ADFS 2.0 server proxy with a network load balancer again here, so that our external user can connect to Office 365, connect then to the ADFS 2.0 server proxy, and then the proxy will pass our connection to the ADFS 2.0 server, the real maintainer of our authentication mechanism, that we will validate our credential with the Active Directory. So there are no informations here. It's just something like, okay, I need to connect here. Okay, I'll pass your connection to the internal ADFS server. It's just to protect our ADFS infrastructure using something in the middle.
So again, high availability, strongly recommend for ADFS 2.0 proxy,
Yeah.
because if that goes down, you won't have, as an external user, the ability to pass through the demilitarized zone.
Yes, but internal user.
Internal users will be fine as long as ADF 2.0 still works, but...
Perfect. Make sense?
Yes.
Perfect. Let's continue with the presentation. Let's see just an example about how authentication flow will work for a user that will try to access to Exchange Online, for example, SharePoint Online, or just the Office 365 portal, and ADFS is in place inside the organization. So I'm here. I'm just a regular user inside the company. I'm using a client that is joined to CorpNet, so is a part of the Active Directory. I want to connect to Exchange Online or SharePoint Online. When the user tries to connect to one of these services, or better, the services that are provided with Office 365, the Office 365 authentication system will redirect the user to our authentication platform. So we will have something like this. The authentication platform will recognize that we have a federation trust between your Active Directory and the Microsoft Online Services infrastructure. So we'll send back the user to the local infrastructure to validate his credential using the local ADFS server. So we will have something like this. User will get his token, his credential, and then will be redirected back to the authentication platform of Office 365. The authentication platform will validate the authentication token, and then will redirect the user to the right service, and the user will get the access to Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and so on. So as you can see, there are many flows that are running behind the authentication of Office 365. All these operations are performed in just a few seconds or less. So for the end user, this procedure is totally transparent and really fast. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's continue in preparing the Federation server farm. We are speaking about the general server farm, so the proxy, but also the ADFS server inside our organization. What we need to have to deploy an ADFS server farm. To answer to your question that you asked me in the module before, to deploy ADFS you need an Active Directory running at least Windows Server 2003. So we are speaking about something that is at least at last 10 years old. So no big problem here. Windows Server 2003, 2008, or 2008 R2 with a functional level of mixed or native mode. Again here, no big problem usually. ADFS component or package must be deployed on Windows Server 2008 or 2008 R2. So the two servers that will run the ADFS needs to be Windows Server 2008, not 2003 at all. What else? You need to deploy the ADFS proxy if you want that your external user can access to Office 365, as we said. It's normal. Right. You need to install on the ADFS server the Microsoft Online Service module for Windows PowerShell. We will see that in a while. And you will need to establish a trust between your local infrastructure and Office 365 to pass the credential between your local and online environment. You need also to install all the required update for the Windows Server, but also for the ADFS package, because after you install the ADFS 2.0 package, you should run window update to get all the possible updates for the system. In particular, there is an update that will enable your ADFS 2.0 farm to support multiple domain. So not just one single namespace, but multiple namespaces. This is really important. So I need to have just one farm to support multiple domain. Okay?
Great.
What is really important is that if you plan to work with ADFS, in this case, you will need to have a public, and I underline again public, SSL certificate provided by a trusted certification authority. And this certification authority should be public, because if you try to work with an auto-generated certificate, this will not work and is not formally supported by Microsoft. So plan to buy one or more certificate, as we said in the module before. Make sense?
Very critical point, yes.
Yeah, we will use this certificate for our ADFS server, but also for the ADFS server proxy, because we will use the same certificate inside and outside our organization. This is really critical.
Maybe we can take a quick break here and take a few questions here along, because this is a very intense subject. A couple of questions came in, and I think it helps clarify the content a bit better. One question that we had here is around the Active Directory server farms. We talked about high availability. You want to have at least two. Is there any consideration, load-related consideration, how many Active Directory servers you should have?
Yeah, there is we have one slide here at the end of this presentation about the suggested number of ADFS server that you should deploy in your farm to satisfy a good or large number of users inside the organization. So I ask you just to wait a while for that table, because it's really clear.
All right, that's going to clarify it there. The other question is, it might not be supported, but is it possible to use ADFS and SSO without directory sync? Just as long as you make sure UPN and immutable ID is properly configured.
The problem is that you need to create your users inside Office 365, so you can establish a trust between your local infrastructure and Office 365, but your Office 365 subscription will be empty, no user at all. Right. So you will need to synchronize your users from your on-premise system to your online system, so DirSync will be needed. Although you might be able to configure these things with PowerShell, could you do a scripted, maybe to push the users over? Push our user using
substitute DirSync?
I don't think so. Also, because when we will talk about DirSync later, we will see that DirSync is handling user in a particular way. So it's linking a local user with a user on the cloud. So PowerShell can just help you in creating user, maybe in bulk, as we said on the first day.
Sync.
But they are separated identity in some way.
Right. So, although you can set it up that way in an unsupported manner, you will need DirSync to make this properly work.
Yeah.
Last question here, brief question. How can the online authority platform validate the token? I think it goes back to
this one. How can
one slide before?
This
Here
one?
we go. This one, yes.
Yeah. This is a really interesting question, but maybe we should talk about that or later if you have time or so, because it's not so important in this moment, in this particular moment, and I prefer, if possible, to go on with the presentation and come back to this really important question later.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Sorry for that.
Clarifying this.
Let's continue with preparing the Federation server farm in this moment, as we said, and as we already did in the module before. We need to have a routable domain inside our Active Directory infrastructure or Active Directory system to enable our ADFS infrastructure to work with Office 365. So if you have something like a domain.local, something else that is not routable, so not .com, not .net, and so on, you need to add, as we did just a few minutes ago, an additional routable UPN suffix to your Active Directory Forest and Trust, and change also with a script all the users that you want to enable for ADFS single sign-on inside your company.
Yes,
Make
and the
sense?
Active Directory stays intact, right?
Perfect, yeah. You don't need to destroy nothing. So, as we already said, your domain that was previously added and verified inside the Office 365 subscription should be the same domain that your users inside your Active Directory are using. So the same UPN inside your Active Directory and connected to Office 365. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, let's start with deploying the Active Directory Federation server. We are talking about the server inside our company, okay? This is the main server that will handle authentication for our users. This is critical because if we have the proxy server running but not the federation server, the server proxy will try to pass the authentication from outside, to ask for authentication credential from outside to inside, but it will not be able to reach the endpoint that will be the federation server. Make sense?
Absolutely. Yep. That's,
Okay.
that's the centerpiece, the federation server. The
Perfect.
proxy
The proxy is just
doing the,
okay.
the handshake, passing through, and securing your internal network.
Perfect. So the first operation that we need to perform is to install Windows Server 2008 or 2008 R2 on our server, and then perform all the required update and install on this server IIS. It's easy, it's not a problem usually. Then, when we have the server up and running and IIS on it, we can, for example, request a certificate from a trusted public certification authority. Like, for example, again, GoDaddy is okay, we can try with that. Let's see this procedure using a demo performed by Screenshot. What we have here in front of us, it's just a general IIS server. So we just need to select on the left column the IIS server, like in this case. That is also the federation server. And we need to double click on server certificate, the area that is marked here. What else? We will need to create a certificate request because we want to create a new certificate. Could be a wildcard certificate, could be a single name, single label certificate, and so on. No problem. Again, I suggest you to create maybe a wildcard because it will be easier then. Create a certificate request. You can you need to choose a common name for the certificate. It's not important to use STS. STS for us is just the common way we use to define the federation server and the federation server name that we will give to our service. But you can call it whenever you want. In my case, in the next demo we will use something like italy-sts.contos.com. So I just I can use whatever name I want. Then I need to fill organization, organizational unit, city, locality, state, country, region. No problem here in general. What is really important here is that you can use the Microsoft RSA channel cryptography provider. That is the default one, no problem. But be careful to change the